So let's talk about the history of copyright, the history of copyright in the United States. As I indicated, the initial Copyright Act was enacted in 1790. Very interesting that our founders, during this age of enlightenment, decided that they wanted to create a mechanism where Americans could create works. They wanted to encourage people to create works, inventions, patents, creative works, write books, write music that they could own for a certain period of time. It was very important during that period of time because the development of the printing press was very important to the economic engine of the United States. And they wanted to encourage more Americans to write books than the offshore copyrighted books from England and Europe. Over this period of time, since 1790, there have been a number of amendments to the Copyright Act that affect the term of the copyright or the length of ownership of the copyright, royalty rates, types, and rights of copyrights. So let's talk about the term of copyright. In 1790, in the original Copyright Act, the term of copyright was only 14 years. In other words, if someone created a work and filed with the U.S. Copyright Office, they would have the exclusive rights and then a monopoly on the rights to that work for 14 years. And at the end of that 14-year period, at the end of the term of copyright, the work then falls into what is called public domain, which means anyone in the public can use that work without getting the permission of the original copyright owner or anyone else for that matter. Now, over the course of this 220 plus year history of the Copyright Act, there have been a number of amendments, particularly to the term of copyright. And currently, the term of copyright is the life of the author plus 70 years, unless the work is a work for hire. And you might be saying, what in the world is a work for hire? Well, a work for hire is when a corporation hires someone to create a work within their scope of employment, or if the work falls in one of 9 categories of types of works that can be considered a work for hire. If that happens, then the corporation, not the creator of the work, is considered the author of the work, and the corporation will own the work for 95 years. Now, I mentioned that the current term of copyright, if it isn't a work for hire, is life plus 70 years. Well, what happens if you have more than one author of the work? Well, if you have more than one author of the work, that 70-year period doesn't run until the death of the last surviving author. I have a perfect example for that. My client, Gerald Levert, the late, great Gerald Levert, wrote songs with a co-writer who is still alive. Gerald unfortunately died in 2006, but his co-writer on a number of his songs is still alive. Let's say that the co-writer lives till 2035. Well, the 70-year period doesn't start to run until after the last surviving author passes. So when he passes, that 70-year period will run, which means that his estate, along with Gerald's estate, would own the copyrights in all of those songs until the year 2105. So you see the importance of the length of copyright, and one of the reasons why I say that the copyright is one of the most valuable assets in the music industry. If you're a student outside of the United States, please recognize that each country has its own copyright law, and those laws might be different from the laws of the United States. So be sure to consider the copyright laws of your nation. The Copyright Act has also been amended to increase the amount of mechanical royalties paid to the owners of the copyright in the composition. You'll recall back in lesson 1, I mentioned how songwriters and publishers became very concerned when the first form of mechanical reproduction of their songs, the piano roll, came out in the early 1900s. As a result of that, the piano roll makers had to pay the owners of the copyright in the composition, the songwriters and publishers, a 2-cent royalty for each copy of the piano roll that was sold. Over the years, that mechanical royalty rate has increased to the current rate of 9.1 cents per copy for recordings less than 5 minutes, or 1.75 cents per minute for recordings in excess of 5 minutes. Books and songs were the primary form of copyrights protected by the Copyright Act until 1972, when Congress created a new type of copyright: the sound recording. The sound recording. The sound recording copyright has to be differentiated from the copyright in the composition. And let's talk about that right now. You'll recall at the beginning of this lesson, I sang the hook to the song If I Was Down and Out, the very first song I wrote. Well, after coming up with that hook, I went home and I wrote the verses, I wrote a bridge, and I put together a complete song. I was unaware at that time, and that's why it's so important for you to take this course, so you can be aware of the importance of protecting your work. I could have copywritten that song, the basic music and the lyrics. And to do that, I would have had to file what is called the Performing Arts Registration, or a PA registration, which protects just that, the music and the lyrics, the basic music and lyrics to the song. So let's call that the PA registration, the copyright in the composition. Well, the sound recording copyright is different from the copyright in the composition. The sound recording copyright protects the fixation of sounds that make up a recording of the composition. The fixation of sound, of course, is going to include all of the various instruments, all of the vocals, all of the mixing that's done to create that specific recording. And Congress wanted to make sure that record companies and artists were protected from other people making exact duplicates of those actual recordings. So they passed this sound recording copyright amendment to the Copyright Act. So usually, the owners of the rights in the composition are the songwriters and the publishers. Publishers are people that actually exploit the music, exploit the songs, try to get the songs used in as many ways as possible in order to generate income. Usually artists assign their rights, and artists do have rights in sound recordings, because when they're creating that work in the studio, the inflections in their voice is a creative work, our creative works. And they assign those copyright interest over to the record companies, and the record companies, of course, exploit the recordings for them. So, you heard me sing the song If I Was Down and Out. I made a sound recording of that song as well. So I could have had or filed a PA registration for that composition. And I've also could have filed an SR form, which stands for sound recording, to protect my rights in the sound recording. I'm going to let you listen to a little bit of the sound recording.
Now you know that my love is true, girl, and it's all left up to you, girl. Now, what would you do, girl? What would you do now? What would you do, girl?
That's my group that I performed with.
If I was down and out, there's no place to go to speak, baby.
Yes, that is me with the 5-inch afro. It was the 70s. So, there's two types of copyrights that are very important to the musician, to both the songwriter and the artist. The copyright in the composition, which is protected by filing the Performing Arts or PA type of registration, and the sound recording, which is protected by filing an SR type of registration. The sound recording copyright also allows you to protect not only the fixation of sounds on that particular recording, but it also enables you to protect any artwork that's on the CD or album or any liner notes, the entire package, or the artwork or creative work that goes into that sound recording can be protected with the SR registration. And under U.S. copyright law, you can protect both the composition and the sound recording by filing a sound recording copyright and indicating and checking the box that you own all of the rights in the composition that's on the recording as well. And that way you can protect both the composition and the sound recording under the sound recording copyright form. Once again, you have to own all of the rights in the composition and the sound recording to be able to do that on one form. In 1976, Congress amended the Copyright Act to include a brand new right that would be of benefit to songwriters and artists. This right gave authors of non-work-for-hire works created after 1978 the rights to recapture the transfer and assignments of those copyright interests 35 years after the original assignment. You'll recall earlier I mentioned how most songwriters assign their interest in copyrights to publishers. And in today's market, most publishers offer songwriters what are called co-publishing and administration deals, where the publishers take care of all of the administrative aspects of exploiting the compositions on behalf of the songwriters in exchange for receiving 25% of the income. Well, recording artists as well transfer their copyright interests to record companies. And as I mentioned earlier, record companies usually pay royalties of 13 to 16% for the sale of the recordings, and usually 50% for any other use of the recordings. Well, you can see how this is such an important right, as 35 years after 1978 is the beginning of 2013. And at the beginning of this year, a number of songwriters and artists reclaimed and recaptured their copyright interest that they transferred back in 1978. And as a result, now they can receive 100% of the income instead of giving up 25% to the publisher, or 84 to 87% to the record company, or the 50% that they normally give up to record companies for other types of uses. Another new right was created in copyright in 1995 when the Digital Performance Right in Sound Recording Act was passed, giving the copyright owners of the sound recording, record companies and artists, payments for any digital transmission of their copyrights. So what does that mean? That means that the owner of the sound recording, the record companies and artists, now get paid anytime those recordings are played through digital types of transmissions. Digital transmissions include cable TV, radio channels, internet channels, satellite radio, XM, Sirius, are all digital transmissions. While owners in the copyrights and compositions, publishers and songwriters, get paid when their songs are performed on terrestrial radio through performance rights organizations, the owners in the copyright and the sound recording, record companies and artists, historically have not. While that's true, the Digital Performance Rights in Sound Recordings Act of 1995 did create a new revenue stream for record companies and artists to be paid. Record companies and artists for years have been complaining about the fact that they don't get paid when their recordings are played on terrestrial radio, and have in fact been lobbying Congress for legislation to make that happen. Well, they haven't been successful in this effort, but at least the 1995 Digital Performance Right in Sound Recording Act is giving record companies and artists the opportunity to be paid when their recordings are streamed and played through this growing digital transmission market.